Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 10 of Politics. We have most of the gang is here today, and it's quite an occurrence. We have Alex is here.
Hello, everybody.
Ryan is here.
Hi.
And so is Amelia.
Big Yeet energy.
All right, then. We'll move right into our first story today, discussing the current status of the Democratic primaries and their quest for a nominee for the President of the United States. Just last night, South Carolina cast its votes, and Joe Biden won a very convincing majority of delegates, putting him in second place now, right behind Bernie Sanders, with Pete Buttigieg in third place.
Yeah, so Bernie Sanders taking New Hampshire and Nevada, with Pete Buttigieg having a slight edge in the delegates in Iowa. The race was very wide open, and we were waiting for South Carolina, and that's where Joe Biden was staking his nomination on, and he got the result. He got 48% of the vote, and he did as he said he would. He said he was going to win South Carolina, and he did. He promised to do that in the debate that was hectic, and that we will only briefly mention because, well, it was interesting, but the moderators really couldn't get a grip of it, and it was just got into a bit of a brawl, to be fair.
It's hard to comment on a verbal bar fight, and that's basically what it was reduced down to. Bloomberg saying he quote bought elections for people.
That was my
favorite quote.
How did the moderator not call him out on that? I was so surprised.
Yeah, that was Bloomberg, one of Bloomberg's like Biden gaffes, as you could say. The thing is, Bloomberg has like the same amount of gaffes that like Trump has. So there are a lot of people that are saying that like Trump and Bloomberg would be like the same candidate when coming to an election, because they're both billionaires. They're both from New York. Yes, Bloomberg has got a little bit more of like mayoral experience, but at the base of it, they've all got their own billionaire issues. And Trump has got the incumbency advantage. So that's why people are quite upset with Bloomberg, especially his first time in the Nevada debate, where Elizabeth Warren just there is no kind way to put it, what she did to him.
So yeah, but Elizabeth Warren, despite the fact that a very good debate showing in Nevada, she was unable to get much of any momentum in South Carolina, or Nevada for that matter. She still struggles to bring it back. There's even reports of her and Amy Klobuchar congratulating Joe Biden last night for winning South Carolina, which many people are associating that with a bid for the vice presidency. So we'll see is that the field is starting to slim. Tom Steyer dropped out last night despite a third place finish in South Carolina. You see a lagging support for Bloomberg, lagging support for Klobuchar, lagging support for Buttigieg, I say with a heavy heart. You see the two frontrunners seeming to emerge are going to be Biden and Sanders, which are going to be two, you have the more conservative part of the Democratic Party, which is Joe Biden, with his, refusing to, not supporting the legalization of marijuana in all 50 states. He has a past of voting questionable on civil rights, and then you have Sanders, who's the Democratic Socialist who voted against Iraq in 2003. So you have this very split now becoming the party, and we'll see where that goes.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting how Tom Steyer decided to suspend his campaign, because he said if I didn't see a path to winning, he'd suspend his campaign, and he couldn't see a path where he would win the presidency. And I feel like I originally was thinking, I was like, that kind of seems like a good philosophy, like in the campaign trail, like if you don't think you could win, you should drop out. But then I'm thinking, like, if everybody who doesn't think they could win would drop out, we'd only have like 2 people left, and then there's not really much of a choice. So I was wondering what you guys would think about that, like that sort of philosophy on the campaign trail.
At this point, I would take 2 candidates over 8.
Right.
Or like I think it's 6 now. So you have 2 main wings of the Democratic Party, of like a bit more like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren style, and then there's more of like the Biden, Pete Buttigieg, Bloomberg style, more moderate. And so just pick a candidate that, from an ideological point of view, aligns with one or the other, and then let them go head to head. Because the thing is that, so there are more moderate candidates, and that's why you had such an issue for any of them to win any of the early states, except South Carolina for Biden. You had Iowa come down to these minute details, and it's a real shame for Pete Buttigieg, because he won Iowa. He won Iowa, but nobody, he didn't get any momentum from it, because everyone was focused on how much of a failure the Iowa caucuses were. So he couldn't get that momentum. And then in New Hampshire, you had Amy Klobuchar's massive rise. And if you look at the voting, you had if you put Pete Buttigieg's numbers and Amy Klobuchar's numbers together, they would have won New Hampshire. In Nevada, it was a little different. Bernie Sanders kind of swept the state, and then in South Carolina, Biden swept the state. So yes, it's nice to have a choice, but it gets to a point where it's just too much. It's like you need to drop out. For example, like I said, Amy Klobuchar, Tom Steyer, and then some of the other candidates. You guys don't have a path to get to the nomination. You guys match up poorly against everyone else running in the race, and you match up poorly versus Donald Trump. So just drop out and let the big boys do their thing. And so I think the last thing to mention is that Super Tuesday is coming up. That is where we're going to find out where the race is going to go. We're either going to have one candidate go straight up and have a plurality of votes, but might not. But we'll see. It might be very close, and we might have to go the whole way to the convention with 2 or maybe 3 candidates at this point. So going from one issue with the United States to another issue that is happening in the United States as well as all over the world now. It's the coronavirus.
Another time. Yay!
I tried.
That was great.
No, firstly, if you're a relatively healthy human being, you are quite safe. The global total is around 87,000 cases that have been reported, and as we've talked about in previous episodes, it started in China, but now it's spread to the United States, it's spread to Italy, and so the coronavirus is spreading.
It's in every continent besides Antarctica.
Yes, exactly. So there are a lot of people that are quite rightly, but also wrongly freaking out about it, because you have this massive air travel between countries of people just going everywhere, and basically the spread is mainly caused by globalization. And so yes, it is dangerous, but the issue is that people are not prepared. So the United States but a few years ago, Donald Trump cut the funding to the CDC and to parts of the NSC that dealt with these huge health crises, and some parts of the National Security Council were just entirely cut out to that used to deal with the Ebola crisis, they used to deal with general health crises. So America is now, I would say, underprepared for this issue, and so the CDC officials warned that the future outbreaks around the world and in the United States are almost inevitable. There's a quote, and that we will see that there's going to be an absolute flood of coronavirus throughout the United States and throughout the world. The thing is with the coronavirus is that it isn't that lethal. The lethality rate is it's just below 2% at this point. But what is important is to make sure that you maintain your own health. Yes, you shouldn't be traveling to places with high alert. Like the CDC has their own risk levels. For example, they say to avoid travel to mainland China, South Korea, Italy, and Iran, and to be careful or to reconsider travel in Japan and Hong Kong. So these are some of the guidelines that are set out. And so, what do you guys think of the response to the coronavirus?
Yeah, I think really quickly, so yeah, the mortality rate is less than 2%, but just to put that in perspective, like the mortality rate of the flu is like 0.05%. So there's like a pretty big jump there, and also the flu is something that's very certain, but just to put that into perspective. And I think that one thing that I keep seeing things coming up that say, like, people in America, due to, like, unpaid work days, like sick days, the coronavirus will be spreading a lot quicker, and that's something that's sort of, like, coming up, and I think that will be something that comes up on, like, debates and stuff, is, like, what their response to, like, healthcare, universal healthcare, and Medicaid would be.
That's true. Because yeah, people like at my school, people will come in all the time if they're sick because they just don't want to miss attendance. So people are going to show up to school and work sick for whatever reason, and they're just going to get everybody else sick if they don't offer paid sick leave and benefits and say you won't be fired if the government says you're in quarantine.
I also think it's interesting to notice the way the markets have been reacting. You know, the Dow Jones has had some of its worst weeks in history.
It dropped
due
the
to
most in history, yeah.
Yeah,
it dropped the most in history, and we haven't had a week like this since the 2008 financial crisis.
I mean, we were heading towards a recession anyway. Like, just, it was about time for some sort of market correction, but it wasn't supposed to be this drastic and sudden.
A lot of people are saying that, like, the Trump administration is downplaying the severity of the coronavirus so that the economy doesn't crash as much, because that's, like, a vital part of his campaign.
See, my problem is people just need to stop panicking. It's like, yes, the coronavirus is bad and we need to deal with that, but that doesn't mean you need to sell your stocks. Please don't. That hurts everybody else.
Yeah, exactly. And also, you need to make sure that it's like, yes, the coronavirus there's no cure that we know of yet, even though that the trials for vaccine have already started, which is an absolutely insane amount of, like, the speed at which we are currently working on the vaccine is very, very quick. But it is going to be like any other disease. Like Ryan said, we need to look at it as for example, as the flu. It's like, what do you make sure that you get your flu shot, and you make sure that, like, if you are sick, you do treat yourself correctly. You don't have to freak out if you get sick, but you just need to make sure you treat yourself. That is the most important point. And also, a very important point, and a very important person, is Mike Pence, who is now currently in charge of the coronavirus response in the United States. And what do you guys think of Mike Pence's appointment?
I'm not really on board with that. I think you should have appointed someone with more experience, or done a co-appointment where Pence could have been the figurehead, but somebody else who actually knew what they were doing could have backed him up. A scientist? Why didn't he put a scientist? It's my opinion.
I think Pence is more to the figurehead than anything, but I think it shows that the Trump administration has actually taken this seriously. I think he realizes that if this continues, more cases arise in the United States, markets continue to slip, that his re-election chances will continue to slip. So I think that putting, like, the second most important person in the United States, at least on paper, in charge of it, shows that, he's committed to ending this. But I also agree that maybe someone with a little more experience should be put in charge. But, I think it's a good step to show that, like, we're using executive authority to try to crank this out.
Yeah, I see that point, but I also think it's, like, sort of, like, putting our country in a dangerous position, because I feel like the fact that he's putting someone who's so close to, like, his re-election campaign on, like, the board, or, like, in charge of this health epidemic, I think that it'll sort of, like, it's just continuing what people are already saying is, like, Trump trying to use this, like, problem towards the benefit of his campaign.
Yeah, he like every president in the first term wants to get re-elected for their second term. That is just the case. The thing is with Pence is that, like, yes, it's important to have someone who's got a good title and who's important within the U.S. government to be in charge of this. But at the same time, there during the autumn, during the summer, and like throughout the 3 years of Trump's presidency, there's always been rumors of Pence being removed or Pence being changed or Pence.
Yep, for Nikki Haley.
Yeah, exactly. That was the latest one. But coronavirus is going to be a failure. Like, containing the coronavirus for Pence is going to be a failure. The CDC has already said that, well, it's going to spread in the United States. There is, like, that is just the case, because you can't stop people from entering the United States and from the virus from spreading, especially with the latest story that we've heard with the health workers in California that were not given the proper protocols and who most likely are contagious or have gotten the coronavirus because of improper care and improper handling of patients in isolation. So we see like these small issues could lead to massive outbreaks, because you just need to talk to one person and the other person goes to meet their family somewhere, I don't know, maybe in the other coast, and that's how easily everything spreads. And so putting Pence in charge firstly alleviates Trump from being in charge of this. Like, oh, look, this is Pence's fault.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't, like, I got nothing to do with it. I put Pence in charge. I thought he was all right. I thought he was smart. He couldn't deal with it. I'm sorry, so I'm going to change him. I'm going to have a new VP. Like, it's very easy for him to spin it either way from the coronavirus. He's going to try to hide away from it, but with the economy entering a recession with the past 2 weeks of the stock market. And to be fair, I'm gonna give the stock market props for holding out this long. To be fair, like they held out for nearly a month, right? Because usually when there's anything that happens, like Trump has a tweet and then the market changes by a few percent. So this is it's great that, like, yes, there is trust, but now there is that collapse that we have seen before.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of a fragile trust that could lead to collapse,
Amazing.
Yes, Bo, you're learning well.
Smooth.
the United States and the Taliban have agreed to a deal that will hopefully lead to peace in Afghanistan. So, on February 29th, which was yesterday, so Friday, the U.S. and Taliban have signed a deal in Doha, Qatar, to end America's longest war. They've agreed in principle to some framework ideas that will lead to the withdrawal of U.S. troops eventually if the Taliban do not attack the government. They do not attack other U.S. troops. They have agreed to prisoner exchanges between both sides. They have agreed to let the Taliban into the fragile Afghan government. They have agreed to some women's rights standards. So, finally, the campaign promise has paid off. Our troops are out of Syria. We're supposed to be coming home from Iraq because they got kicked out of the country. But then they stayed. And now the U.S. troops are supposedly coming home from Afghanistan, which would be quite a change, since considering we've been there since October of 2001. We've been fighting. We spent over $2 trillion on Afghanistan to try to maintain security there, and finally, we've agreed to a deal. And there's been many criticisms by people on both sides of the aisle on the Trump administration for, quote, negotiating with terrorists, which the United States has maintained a policy of not doing since its inception. However, I would argue that this is the best chance they've got for peace. They've tried to install democracy. It hasn't worked. Afghanistan has some of the highest corruption. Last week or 2 weeks ago, they had an election, and only like 20% of eligible voters came out and voted. It's evident that democracy in Afghanistan has not succeeded. So I've been arguing this for a long time, that I believe that dealing with the Taliban was important for security in Afghanistan, and now they've done it.
Yeah, the deal with the Taliban, it's a great deal from Trump's point of view, and it'll have a great impact on his re-election. showing how he's a strong leader and he can make deals and not only break them. But at the same time, the U.S. If the U.S. fully withdraws from Afghanistan and like doesn't leave a residual force, then what's the point? What's the point of the deal? There's no way to enforce it in any way. It's like yes, there is that deal, but which U.S. president is going to have another troop surge in Afghanistan? That's just never. That's not going to happen. That's going to be absolutely detrimental to their like re-election or like to the party in charge at the time where that would happen. So yes, it's great that the U.S. and Taliban won't be fighting anymore, but at the same time, as soon as the U.S. leaves, the Taliban has free reign, just like we've seen in Syria, where the Russian-backed forces, Assad's forces, had a clash with the Turkish forces, with around 30, with the reported 30 Turkish fighters that have died, and this has caused a bit of an issue. So the background to this is that you had Turkey's a member of NATO, and they bought armaments from Russia, the S-300 missile defense system. This is against NATO policy, but within the NATO agreement, there is no way to remove a country unless the country removes itself. So Turkey was basically covering themselves from both sides, from not being attacked by Russia because they're buying armaments from them, not being attacked by NATO because of NATO. And so the issue came because Turkey has claims over parts of northern Syria, and they have launched offensives previously, notably after the U.S. withdrawal from Syria. They were able to gain some ground and gain influence in that area. And so now, with Syria's forces pushing back, and there's then being a clash between the two countries, you see the issues arising between Turkey and Russia. But at the same time, it is a bit of it's very strange because those two countries are very close. Erdogan and Putin are close to each other, but both being quite authoritarian in the way that they run their countries. But Turkey has over the past few days released a lot of the refugees, flushing them into Europe, where Europe had an agreement with Turkey to limit the amount of refugees that Turkey would allow to pass through the borders to Greece and to other EU countries. So Turkey is trying to get as much as they can from both Russia and Europe to get basically whatever they want in return for what we don't know, because, well, the story is it's quite fresh, quite new, and we don't know what is going to happen in the future with this. What do you guys think?
Well, since the 2016 election being the height of it, I think we've seen a resurgence in nativism and xenophobia from around the world. Ever since as you mentioned, Syria collapsed in 2011, there have been issues with migrants trying to reach Europe via overland or through water, where you have instances of the Italian Coast Guard opening fire on migrant ships that refuse to return back to their native countries. You have people bankrupting themselves just to get a chance to get on a rickety canoe to try to make it across the Mediterranean Sea. And instead of the Western powers, NATO and things, doing what they can to help the people, taking them in, dividing them up evenly across countries. You've seen a select few take in many migrants, like Germany, but you've seen many, like Italy and Greece, simply close its borders, or people basically arrest them and hold them in holding camps until they're deported back. And now that Turkey has been fed up with the amount of, because they have one of the largest refugee populations in the region, they're fed up with it. And now they're using refugees as human capital to achieve their goals of of achieving further independence from NATO. It's deplorable, and we've seen this behavior before from Erdogan. We've seen that they have no. He honestly, I don't think, has much of a conscience. He doesn't care. He does whatever he has to do to get what he wants. He's attacked the Kurds that have been his allies in fighting ISIS, not necessarily his official allies, but they were working together to accomplish a goal. And the second the United States backs away, he stabs his friend in the back. We've seen them betray the United States by purchasing Russian weapons that the explicit NATO charter says the main point of NATO is to go against Russia. And he, externally stabs him in the back. It's extremely alarming that our most useful partner in the region, we have the United States has a nuclear arsenal in Turkey. They have air bases that they use to attack ISIS fighters in Syria. Now that we've supposedly will be withdrawn from Afghanistan in the near future, we've already been expelled from Iraq, but we've continued to stay. The Iraq situation's in turmoil. Afghanistan, we're supposedly leaving. Turkey, we're losing our friend because they're choosing to stab people in the back and attack our allies. The United States is losing its grip on the region. Its fragile grip already. It's losing that grip. So, national security in that region will definitely be hindered.
Mm-hmm. I think it also, you were saying how sort of it's like deplorable to use migrants as like, or refugees as this like way to get what you want in foreign policy. And I think it sort of speaks to the strategy in Russia right now, which is to like weaponize the migrant crisis to fracture NATO and the EU because it's, or more like the EU than NATO because of like the migrant policy. And clearly like when we're in these times of crises, like all of the tensions are so much higher and like you were saying, like xenophobia and just like the response to the refugees has become much more tense in that sense. So I think it is like a Russian strategy to weaponize migration in order to fracture the EU more.
Yeah, Russia doesn't have a lot of like chips in the way that they can put influence in Europe, but this is a way, and so Turkey and Russia have become more friendly over the last couple of years, and so now they've come out recently and talking about this crisis on the border, saying that like we're gonna have a diplomatic solution to this issue. Everything's gonna be okay. Don't worry about it. But the two countries did just like shoot at each other. So you could say that yes, there are a lot of issues between the two countries. But they are very friendly, so you can't really tell what's going to happen because you don't have like the way that foreign policy is done, especially in authoritarian states, is that it's usually done between the leaders, and not many people know what's going on until it happens. Yeah, so now we're just waiting on what's happening, and so now we have seen Turkey push refugees into Greece, and Greece deploying its military onto the border between the two countries to try to stop the flow and also make sure everything's gonna be all right.
In other news, back to the United States for a minute. Harvey Weinstein has been sentenced to prison. After the trial, he's been finally brought to justice for his crimes of, sexual assault and sexual predation. On the 5 charges that were brought against him, 2 were the jury found him guilty on 2 of them. He will be sentenced. He has been faced up to 29 years in prison before he will be sentenced on March 11th in front of the Manhattan Supreme Court. The Me Too movement finally, we've been going after Harvey Weinstein for a long time now, but it has finally, cultivated in this sentencing of, the man who, seemingly started it all. He was, the first one to really be accused. He's been accused of some pretty vile things, but now they finally, ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
We got him. as a woman, that's something that you always worry about, is like just sexual assault and various things on that. And seeing someone who was a historical predator, he was always just creeping on everybody, and seeing him actually brought to justice it's good. It like makes us think that, yeah, okay, so yeah, things have been unfair in the past and stuff, but we're bringing these people to justice now. That's good. So yeah, I'm glad he's going to jail.
Yeah, I think it's also sort of like metaphorical in the sense that like kind of like what you said, Bo, like this was the first thing, the thing that started it all, and we're finally like seeing some sort of closure, not in the sense that the movement is anywhere close to over, but in the sense that like we're actually starting to get some sort of justice in it. Yeah.
So yeah, on this kind of happy but a bittersweet.
And I was gonna say that. Oh my gosh.
I beat you to the punch.
Yeah.
We're going to be ending our 10th episode of Politics. I hope you enjoyed having the gang back.
Yeah, a little choppy, but we'll work on it.
Yeah.
We'll
It's been a minute.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you very much for listening to this. It's not this week's, because this isn't a weekly podcast, is it?
This episode.
It's a bi-weekly.
It's been
I don't think
weeks,
we're consistent in any possible way.
Yeah,
But it's quality.
consistent-ish.
Quality takes time, okay?
Yes, that's exactly what that is. But thank you very much for listening, and we hope you have a great few weeks up until our next podcast, where we're going to wish you another great few weeks.
Don't get coronavirus.
Don't get coronavirus. All right. Bye-bye.